Adam Schiff thought he was completely untouchable, but when he faced off against Senator John Kennedy, his 20-year political career was systematically dismantled in just 47 minutes. What you are about to witness is one of the most severe political takedowns in congressional history. When Hollywood's Adam Schiff tried to humiliate a country lawyer from Louisiana, he walked right into a constitutional trap. Smash that like button, because in 47 minutes you will watch one single question end a 20-year career. This country lawyer just ended Schiff's entire narrative with hard facts and documents. Picture this. The congressman who spent 3 years claiming secret Russia evidence meets a Louisiana lawyer who actually read the classified files. Schiff thought he was facing a hillbilly. Instead, he got a Harvard law graduate with a briefcase full of receipts. Hit subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in constitutional justice. The Senate hearing room was packed, C-SPAN cameras rolling live. This was supposed to be Adam Schiff's easy victory over a simple country lawyer from Louisiana. The media had already decided the outcome. CNN predicted a Harvard prosecutor would school a Southern hick. Twitter celebrated with pro-Schiff hashtags trending. Vegas odds favored Schiff 20-1. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. Senator John Kennedy shuffled in, looking like he had gotten lost on his way to a fishing trip. He wore a rumpled suit, carried an old briefcase, and spoke with that slow Louisiana drawl that made people think of simple country folk. Adam Schiff entered like a movie star, perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect confidence. He had taken down opponents on TV for years. This would be easy. That is when Schiff made his fatal mistake. "Mr. Kennedy," Schiff said with that condescending tone that made progressives swoon, "perhaps stick to crawfish farming and leave constitutional law to those who actually understand it." The room stirred. Even by Washington standards, that was brutal. Kennedy's response was gentle, almost a whisper. "Well, golly, Mr. Schiff, you're right. I'm just a simple country lawyer. Went to some little school. What was it called? Oh yeah, Harvard Law School." First crack in Schiff's confidence, and you're right. I don't know constitutional law. Just clerked for the Supreme Court, but I reckon that don't count for much. The room realized something had shifted. This wasn't the bumbling hick they had expected. "But my daddy taught me something," Kennedy continued, reaching for his briefcase. "When someone talks real fancy, you better check their homework, because the loudest talkers usually got the most to hide." Kennedy opened his briefcase, revealing stacks of official documents with government seals. "So I checked your homework, Mr. Schiff, and boy did I find some interesting things. Comment trap set if you see what is coming." The country lawyer just revealed he is actually a constitutional scholar, and Schiff walked straight into the trap. Kennedy's first folder was marked with the distinctive seals of the House Intelligence Committee. When he opened it, the documents inside seemed to carry the weight of national security itself. Schiff's confident expression flickered as he realized this was not going to be the softball questioning he had expected. "Mr. Schiff," Kennedy began, his voice taking on a serious tone while maintaining that deceptive country charm. "You serve on the House Intelligence Committee, don't you? That's a pretty important job, protecting America's most sensitive secrets." Schiff straightened in his chair, trying to regain his earlier confidence. "Yes, Senator Kennedy, I take that responsibility very seriously. The Intelligence Committee's work is crucial to national security, and I've always conducted myself with the highest standards of—" "Oh, I'm sure you have," Kennedy interrupted gently. "That's why I'm a little confused about something. See, I got curious about the timing of certain classified briefings and certain news stories that followed them. Call it my simple country curiosity." Kennedy began laying out documents with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. "Let me show you something interesting." On March 15, 2019, you attended a classified briefing about ongoing counterintelligence operations. Highly sensitive stuff. The kind that could put lives in severe danger if it leaked to the wrong folks. He displayed a timeline on the chamber's monitors. That briefing ended at 2:00 p.m. At 2:47 p.m. the same day, phone records show you made a call to a producer at CNN. At 6:00 p.m. that evening, CNN ran an exclusive story containing details that were discussed in that classified briefing. The timeline was damning in its precision. Schiff tried to interrupt, but Kennedy held up a gentle hand. Now I'm just a simple man, but when classified briefings at 2:00 p.m. become CNN exclusives at 6:00 p.m., that seems like what we lawyers call leaking classified information. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just coincidence. Kennedy pulled out another document. Let's check another date. April 3, 2019. Another classified briefing you attended. This one about intelligence sources and methods. The kind of information that could compromise ongoing operations and put American lives at risk. The second timeline appeared on screen, showing the exact same pattern. Classified briefing. Immediate phone call to media. Evening news story containing classified details. Briefing ends at 3:15 p.m. You call MSNBC. At 3:52 p.m. By 7:00 p.m., MSNBC is running a story with information that could only have come from someone in that briefing room. Kennedy's voice began to carry more weight as he continued his methodical dismantling. But here's what really troubles me, Mr. Schiff. This wasn't a one-time thing, or even a two-time thing. Over a period of 2 years, I found 23 instances where classified briefings you attended were followed within hours by media stories containing information that had been discussed in those briefings. The number hung in the air like an indictment. 23 separate occasions. This wasn't accidental or coincidental. This was systematic. Now I may be just a country lawyer, but I know what the penalty is for leaking classified information. It's up to 10 years in federal prison, and when that information endangers ongoing operations or intelligence sources, it can be considered a supreme betrayal of the nation. Schiff's panic was becoming visible. His hands gripped the edge of the table as he realized the scope of Kennedy's evidence. Senator Kennedy, you're making serious accusations without understanding the context of, "Oh, I understand the context just fine," Kennedy replied with devastating calm. The context is that you were using your position on the Intelligence Committee to turn classified information into television entertainment. You were treating America's most sensitive secrets like talking points for your media appearances. Kennedy reached for another folder. This one marked with Department of Justice seals. But that's not even the worst part, Mr. Schiff. The worst part is what happened to some of our intelligence assets after these leaks. The chamber fell silent as Kennedy displayed classified documents showing the compromise of intelligence operations. 3 separate human intelligence sources were compromised and had to be extracted from hostile countries. 2 ongoing counterterrorism operations were blown. 1 American intelligence officer barely escaped safely. Kennedy's voice rose with moral authority. Real people, Mr. Schiff. Real Americans whose lives were put at risk because you couldn't resist the temptation to see your name in the newspaper and your face on television. He fixed Schiff with a stare that carried the full weight of constitutional authority. You took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and the American people. Instead, you turned the House Intelligence Committee into your personal media operation with classified information as your currency. Kennedy began pacing, his Southern gentleman facade giving way to prosecutorial intensity. Every phone call you made to CNN, every leak you provided to MSNBC, every classified detail you shared with reporters, That wasn't oversight, Mr. Schiff. That was betrayal. Betrayal of your oath, betrayal of your colleagues, and betrayal of the American people who trusted you with their most sensitive secrets. Schiff sat in stunned silence, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't constitute either perjury or an admission of guilt. But we're just getting started, Kennedy said, reaching for his next folder. Because leaking classified information for media attention was just your warm-up act. What you did with the Russia investigation makes those leaks look like jaywalking. Smash that like button if you think leaking classified information for media attention is a massive violation. The next part will show you how deep this situation really goes. Kennedy's next folder was thicker than the first two combined, bound with FBI seals and marked with classifications that made even the security personnel in the chamber shift nervously. When he opened it, the documents inside seemed to pulse with the weight of 3 years of American political upheaval. Mr. Schiff, Kennedy began, his voice taking on the cadence of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. You spent 3 years telling the American people that you had seen evidence in plain sight of Donald Trump coordinating with Russia. That's what you said, isn't it? Before Schiff could answer, Kennedy gestured to the chamber's main monitors. Video clips began playing a montage of Schiff's television appearances spanning from 2017 to 2020. His voice echoed through the chamber as he made claim after claim about evidence, coordination, and criminal conspiracy. We have seen evidence in plain sight, Schiff's recorded voice declared on CNN. There is evidence of coordination, he insisted on MSNBC. The evidence is hiding in plain sight, he repeated on every network that would have him. Kennedy let the clips play for several minutes, the cumulative effect staggering. This wasn't a politician making occasional statements. This was a systematic campaign of claims about evidence that, as America would soon learn, never existed. According to my staff's count, Kennedy said, producing a calculator with theatrical precision, you made public claims about having evidence of Trump-Russia coordination 237 times over 3 years. That's an average of once every 4.5 days. Mr. Schiff, you built your entire political brand on having secret evidence that proved Donald Trump was a Russian agent. Kennedy began writing numbers on a whiteboard that had been set up for the hearing. 237 public claims, 47 television appearances, 89 social media posts, 23 official congressional statements, all claiming you had evidence of coordination. He turned to face Schiff directly. Now, I may be just a country lawyer, but I got curious about what evidence you actually had. So I did what any good detective would do. I looked at the classified briefings you attended, the FBI reports you received, and the intelligence assessments you were privy to. Kennedy produced a stack of FBI documents, each marked with official seals and classification stamps. These here are the actual FBI briefings you attended during the Russia investigation, internal memos, intelligence assessments, and briefing materials that were provided to the House Intelligence Committee. The first document appeared on the monitors, heavily redacted but with key passages highlighted. This is from a briefing you attended on January 23, 2018. The FBI explicitly told the committee, quote, "No evidence of coordination between Trump campaign and Russian government has been identified." Schiff tried to interrupt, but Kennedy pressed forward relentlessly. February 15, 2018. Another briefing you attended. FBI assessment, no evidence of criminal conspiracy or coordination found. March 8, 2018. Investigation has not substantiated allegations of coordination. April 12, 2018. No evidence of coordination between any Trump associates and Russian intelligence services. Kennedy's voice gained momentum as he documented each briefing. 19 separate occasions, Mr. Schiff. 19 times, the FBI briefed your committee that they had found no evidence of the coordination you were claiming existed, and yet you continued going on television claiming you had seen evidence in plain sight. Kennedy pulled out his calculator again, the sound of the buttons clicking in the silent chamber like a drumbeat of accountability. Let me see if I got this math right. The FBI told you no evidence 19 times. You told the American people lots of evidence 237 times. That's a ratio of about 12 false statements for every truth you were told. The mathematical precision was undeniable. This wasn't about interpretation or nuance. This was about documented false statements told repeatedly over 3 years. Now, I may have gotten my education in the Louisiana Bayou, Kennedy continued, but when someone tells me no evidence 19 times and I keep saying lots of evidence, we call that something specific back home. We call it lying. Kennedy produced another set of documents, these bearing the seal of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's office. But it gets worse, Mr. Schiff. Because you didn't just lie about evidence, you actively promoted what you knew was Russian disinformation. The monitors displayed portions of the Steele dossier alongside classified briefings about its origins. This here is the famous Steele dossier that you promoted as credible intelligence. And this is a classified briefing from August 2017, where you were explicitly told that the dossier was likely Russian disinformation designed to interfere in American elections. Kennedy's voice rose with constitutional indignation. You were told in a classified briefing that the Russians had fed false information to Christopher Steele specifically to disrupt American democracy. And what did you do with that information? You went on television and promoted it as evidence of Trump-Russia coordination. He began pacing, his country lawyer facade completely gone now, replaced by the righteous anger of a constitutional scholar. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mr. Schiff. The Russians created disinformation to interfere in our election. You were briefed that it was Russian disinformation, and then you spent 3 years promoting that Russian disinformation to the American people. Kennedy stopped pacing and fixed Schiff with a stare that could have melted steel. Mr. Schiff, who was really doing Russia's bidding, the man you accused of coordination, or the congressman who spent 3 years promoting actual Russian disinformation? The question hung in the air like a sword over Schiff's head. The irony was so complete, so devastating, that even Democratic members of the committee looked uncomfortable. But here's what really bothers me, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting. While you were lying to the American people about evidence you knew didn't exist, real investigations into real threats were being ignored. Resources were wasted, trust in our institutions was destroyed. And all for what? So you could be the star of cable news. Kennedy reached for his next folder. When you testified under oath to this very committee that you had seen evidence in plain sight of coordination, were you referring to these FBI briefings that said there was no evidence, or were you referring to some other evidence that somehow nobody else has ever seen? Schiff's silence was answer enough. I'm just asking, Kennedy concluded with devastating gentleness. Because in Louisiana, when someone says something under oath that ain't true, we have a word for that. Starts with P and ends with 5 to 20 years in federal prison. We're trending #1 worldwide. Comment liar if you think Schiff got caught red-handed. But wait until you see what Kennedy reveals about Schiff's Hollywood paymasters. Kennedy's fourth folder bore the unmistakable seals of the Federal Election Commission. When he opened it, the financial documents inside told a story of compromise that would make even seasoned Washington observers gasp. This wasn't just about lies or leaks anymore. This was about money, influence, and the systematic purchase of a congressman by the entertainment industry. Mr. Schiff, Kennedy began, pulling out what appeared to be a comprehensive financial analysis. I got curious about something while I was researching your Russia claims. See, lying to the American people is bad enough, But I wondered if there might be a profit motive behind all that lying. Kennedy began displaying campaign finance records on the chamber's monitors. According to Federal Election Commission filings, between 2017 and 2023, you received $2.8 million in campaign contributions from entertainment industry sources. That's a mighty impressive haul for someone representing Burbank, California. The numbers were staggering, but Kennedy wasn't finished with his financial archaeology. But that's just your campaign account, Mr. Schiff. Let's talk about your personal finances during the same period. Kennedy produced a series of bank records and financial disclosures, speaking fees from entertainment companies and their affiliated organizations, $1.2 million, book advance from a publisher owned by a major Hollywood studio, $2.1 million, paid appearances at events sponsored by entertainment industry groups, $340,000. He pulled out his calculator again, the device that had become his signature weapon of mathematical accountability. That's $6.46 million in total compensation from the entertainment industry. During the same period you were promoting the Russia coordination narrative. Now I may be just a simple country lawyer, but that seems like a mighty convenient coincidence. Kennedy began connecting the financial dots with prosecutorial precision. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your biggest donors weren't just giving you money out of the goodness of their hearts. They were buying specific votes on specific issues that affected their bottom line. The monitors displayed a side-by-side comparison that was clear and damning. Major entertainment industry donations on the left, Schiff's votes on technology, and censorship bills on the right. The correlation was perfect every single time. Big Tech and Hollywood wanted Congress to expand censorship powers. Guess who voted their way every single time? Kennedy's voice carried the weight of documented proof. When they wanted Section 230 expanded to give them more power to silence conservatives, you voted yes. When they wanted government pressure on social media companies to censor dissenting voices, you provided that pressure. Kennedy produced internal communications that had been subpoenaed from various tech companies. These emails show direct coordination between your office and major social media platforms. You weren't just voting for censorship, you were actively coordinating it. The documents revealed a systematic pattern of Schiff's office reaching out to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to request specific content be removed or restricted. The timing of these requests coincided perfectly with his major donors' business interests. Mr. Schiff, you turned your congressional office into a censorship coordination center for your Hollywood paymasters, Kennedy said, his country charm completely replaced by prosecutorial fire. When conservative voices threatened their narrative control, you made sure those voices were silenced. But Kennedy wasn't finished with the financial arrangements. He produced another set of documents showing how Schiff's family had benefited from his political positions. Let's talk about your family business, Mr. Schiff. Your wife's consulting firm received $890,000 in contracts from entertainment companies during your tenure on the Intelligence Committee. Your brother-in-law's production company got $1.2 million in deals with studios that were major donors to your campaigns. Kennedy began laying out a flowchart that showed money moving from entertainment companies to Schiff's campaigns, then to his family members through various business arrangements. You didn't just sell your vote, Mr. Schiff. You turned your entire family into a financial routing operation for Hollywood influence. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't just about individual donations or speaking fees. This was a systematic financial scheme that had enriched Schiff and his family while giving entertainment industry donors unprecedented control over congressional policy. But here's what really gets me, Kennedy said, his voice rising with moral indignation. While you were getting rich off lying about Russia coordination, real threats to American democracy were being ignored. Chinese influence operations, actual foreign interference in our elections, genuine national security threats, all pushed aside so you could chase your conspiracy theories and enrich your bank account. Kennedy produced intelligence assessments showing various threats that had been downplayed or ignored while the committee focused on the Russia investigation. Your obsession with a hoax investigation meant that real investigations into real threats were underfunded and understaffed. He fixed Schiff with a stare that carried the weight of absolute moral authority. You took $6.46 million from people who wanted to control American political discourse, and you gave them exactly what they paid for. You used your position on the Intelligence Committee to silence their critics and promote their narratives. Kennedy's final blow in this section was delivered with raw simplicity. Mr. Schiff, the question isn't whether you are financially compromised. The evidence of your compromise is sitting right here on this table. The question is whether you have any shame left about betraying the American people for money. Schiff sat in silence, unable to defend against documented financial records that told the story of his actions better than any accusation could. But we're not done yet, Kennedy said, reaching for another folder. Because taking money from Hollywood to promote lies was just the warm-up. What you did to silence American citizens makes that financial arrangement look like petty theft. Drop a like if you think Schiff sold out America for Hollywood money, but the next part about election interference will blow your mind. Kennedy's fifth folder was marked with the seals of multiple intelligence agencies and bore a classification level that made everyone in the chamber understand they were about to witness something unprecedented. This wasn't just about financial compromise anymore. This was about the systematic suppression of American citizens' constitutional rights in service of political power. Mr. Schiff, Kennedy began, his voice carrying the gravity of someone about to expose an attack on American democracy itself. Let's talk about October 2020. Let's talk about how you interfered in a presidential election by silencing true information about a candidate's family. Kennedy produced a timeline that would become one of the most important documents in American political history. October 14, 2020. The New York Post publishes a story about Hunter Biden's laptop containing evidence of potential corruption involving Joe Biden and his family's business dealings. The timeline appeared on the monitors, showing the rapid sequence of events that followed. October 14th, 3:47 p.m., approximately 4 hours after the story breaks, you appear on CNN, claiming the laptop story is Russian disinformation without providing any evidence for that claim. Kennedy's voice began to build with prosecutorial intensity. October 14th, 6:23 p.m. You coordinate with 51 former intelligence officials to sign a letter claiming the laptop story has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. The letter appeared on screen with Schiff's coordination emails clearly visible. Kennedy had somehow obtained communications that showed Schiff's direct involvement in organizing the intelligence official's statement. Now, Mr. Schiff, here's what troubles me about that letter, Kennedy said, producing FBI documents that had been declassified for the hearing. At the time you organized this letter claiming Russian disinformation, the FBI had already authenticated the laptop as genuine. They'd had it for nearly a year and had verified its contents. The FBI authentication documents were clear. They showed that the Bureau had verified the laptop's authenticity in late 2019 and had been investigating its contents throughout 2020. When Schiff organized the disinformation letter, he was contradicting known facts. So, when you went on television claiming Russian disinformation, you were lying, Kennedy said with clarity. When you organized intelligence officials to sign a letter about Russian operations, you were promoting a lie. And when that lie was used to suppress a true news story about a presidential candidate, you were interfering in an American election. Kennedy produced communications between Schiff's office and major social media platforms that had been obtained through congressional subpoena. But you didn't just lie about the laptop, Mr. Schiff. You used your position to pressure social media companies to suppress the story entirely. The communications were explicit. Schiff's office had contacted Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube within hours of the Post story breaking, requesting that the platforms restrict or remove content related to the laptop story. The platforms complied immediately. Twitter locked the New York Post's account for weeks. Kennedy documented. Facebook reduced the story's distribution by 95%. YouTube removed videos discussing the laptop contents. All because you told them it was Russian disinformation when you knew it wasn't. Kennedy began pacing, his constitutional expertise on full display. Mr. Schiff, the First Amendment prohibits Congress from abridging freedom of speech or freedom of the press. But you found a workaround, didn't you? You couldn't legally censor the press, so you got your big tech donors to do it for you. The constitutional violation was clear and documented. Schiff had used his government position to pressure private companies to suppress news coverage that could affect an election. It was exactly the kind of government interference in elections that the Constitution was designed to prevent. But here's what really bothers me, Kennedy said, his voice rising with moral authority. That laptop contained evidence of potential corruption involving the man who would become President of the United States. The American people had a right to know about that evidence before they voted. Kennedy produced polling data showing how knowledge of the laptop story might have affected the election outcome. According to multiple post-election polls, between 4.6% and 9.4% of Biden voters said they would have changed their vote if they'd known about the laptop story. In an election decided by 44,000 votes in 3 states, that's the margin of victory. The implication was staggering. Schiff's suppression of the laptop story may have directly affected the outcome of a presidential election. You didn't just lie about Russian disinformation, Mr. Schiff. You didn't just suppress a news story. You potentially changed the outcome of a presidential election by preventing American voters from accessing true information about a candidate. Kennedy produced more documents showing the pattern extended beyond just the laptop story. But this wasn't an isolated incident, was it? For 4 years, you used your position to coordinate with tech companies to suppress conservative voices, alternative media, and anyone who challenged the narratives promoted by your Hollywood donors. The documents showed dozens of instances where Schiff's office had contacted social media platforms requesting censorship of specific accounts, posts, or stories. The pattern was systematic and extensive. You turned the House Intelligence Committee into a censorship bureau, Kennedy said. With profound clarity, you used your position to silence American citizens whose only crime was disagreeing with your political narratives. Kennedy's final point in this section carried the weight of constitutional authority. Mr. Schiff, you swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution. The First Amendment is part of that Constitution. When you suppress free speech, when you silence the press, when you prevent Americans from accessing information they need to make electoral decisions, you're not protecting democracy, you're destroying it. Schiff sat motionless, finally understanding that his pattern of suppression and interference had been completely documented by someone who understood the constitutional implications better than his own attorneys. But even constitutional violations pale in comparison to what we're about to discuss, Kennedy said, reaching for his most damaging folder yet, because everything we've covered so far was just preparation for your ultimate betrayal of the oath you swore to uphold. Share this video before Big Tech censors it. Comment First Amendment if you believe Schiff violated the Constitution. The final destruction is coming next. Kennedy's final folder was different from all the others. It bore no official seals, no classification stamps, no government markings. Instead, It contained something far more powerful: copies of the Constitution itself, marked and annotated with Kennedy's own handwriting, cross-referenced with every oath violation and constitutional betrayal they had documented over the past hour. "Mr. Schiff," Kennedy began, his voice carrying the full weight of constitutional authority, "I want to talk about the oath you took when you were sworn into Congress. Do you remember that oath?" Kennedy stood and moved to the center of the chamber, holding a worn pocket Constitution that had obviously seen decades of use. "Let me remind you of the words you spoke before Almighty God and the American people. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." He paused, letting the words sink into the consciousness of everyone in the chamber. "Support and defend, Mr. Schiff. Not exploit and betray, not ignore and violate. Support and defend." Kennedy opened his Constitution to Article 1, his expertise as a former Supreme Court clerk evident in how easily he navigated the document. This Constitution establishes a federal government of limited powers, enumerated specifically to prevent the kind of abuse we've documented here today. His voice began to build with the passion of someone who had spent his career studying and defending the founding principles of American government. The First Amendment prohibits Congress from making laws abridging freedom of speech or freedom of the press. But you found ways around that prohibition, didn't you? You couldn't legally censor Americans, so you pressured private companies to do your censoring for you. Kennedy began pacing, his constitutional scholarship on full display. The founders understood that politicians would always want more power than the Constitution grants them. That's why they created a system of checks and balances. That's why they limited government authority. That's why they protected individual rights. He stopped pacing and faced Schiff directly. "But you've spent your career finding ways around those constitutional limitations. Every restriction they placed on government power, you found a way to circumvent. Every right they protected, you found a way to violate." Kennedy produced his annotated copy of Schiff's congressional voting record, cross-referenced with constitutional provisions. "In your time in Congress, you voted for 47 bills that expanded government surveillance powers beyond constitutional limits. You've supported 23 measures that restricted First Amendment rights. You've endorsed 15 different schemes to circumvent Fourth Amendment protections. The systematic nature of the constitutional violations was staggering. This wasn't about policy disagreements or political differences. This was about a pattern of voting against the very Constitution Schiff had sworn to defend. But voting for unconstitutional policies is just the beginning," Kennedy continued. "What you did as a member of the Intelligence Committee goes far beyond mere policy violations. You used your constitutional position to attack the Constitution itself." Kennedy's voice rose with righteous anger. "You leaked classified information to undermine political opponents. You promoted lies about Russian coordination to delegitimize an elected president. You coordinated with private companies to silence American citizens. You interfered in elections by suppressing truthful information." He began writing charges on a whiteboard that had been set up for the hearing. Violation of oath of office, abuse of constitutional authority, conspiracy to suppress First Amendment rights, interference in federal elections, perjury before Congress. Each charge was accompanied by specific evidence they had reviewed during the hearing. The constitutional case against Schiff was overwhelming and meticulously documented. "Mr. Schiff, I may talk like a country lawyer, but I actually understand the Constitution," Kennedy said, his expertise finally revealed in its full glory. "See, I didn't just attend Harvard Law School. I graduated magna cum laude. I didn't just study constitutional law. I clerked for a Supreme Court justice. I didn't just read about constitutional principles. I've spent my career defending them." Kennedy's transformation was complete. The simple country lawyer facade was gone, replaced by one of America's foremost constitutional scholars. And what you've done using government power to silence political opposition, leaking classified information for personal gain, lying under oath to Congress, interfering in elections, that's not oversight, that's not public service, that's tyranny. Kennedy reached into his jacket and pulled out his own oath of office, the document he had signed when sworn into the Senate. When I took this oath, I meant every word. I swore to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today I'm fulfilling that oath. His voice became cutting. Because you've become a domestic enemy of the Constitution, Mr. Schiff. You've used your position to attack the very document you swore to defend. You've perverted constitutional authority for personal and political gain. Kennedy's next words would be quoted in constitutional law textbooks for generations. The founders feared exactly what you represent, someone who would use American institutions to serve their own power rather than the American people. They designed our system to prevent politicians like you from accumulating the kind of unchecked authority you've wielded. He opened his Constitution to the 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, not to Adam Schiff, not to the Intelligence Committee, to the states and to the people. Kennedy's voice reached a crescendo of constitutional authority. You've forgotten the most basic principle of American government, that political power belongs to the people, not to the politicians who temporarily exercise it. You've used the people's power to attack the people's rights. He fixed Schiff with a stare that carried the weight of 250 years of American constitutional tradition. Mr. Schiff, you haven't just violated your oath of office. You've betrayed the fundamental trust that makes representative government possible. You've proven that the founders were right to fear politicians who put personal power above constitutional principles. Schiff sat in complete silence, finally understanding that he was facing not just political opposition, but constitutional justice, delivered by someone who understood the founding documents better than he understood his own corruption. The Constitution you swore to defend is still here, Kennedy concluded, holding up the worn document. But your career defending it ended the moment you decided to attack it instead. Smash that like, if you believe in constitutional justice, comment oathbreaker. If you think Schiff betrayed his sworn duty, the final takedown is about to begin. The chamber had fallen into a silence so complete that the sound of Kennedy closing his final folder echoed like a gavel striking the bench of justice. For nearly an hour, he had systematically dismantled not just Adam Schiff's arguments, but his entire political persona, his credibility, and his career. Now it was time for the final reckoning. Kennedy stood slowly, his movements deliberate and heavy with the weight of constitutional authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the moral force of someone who had just spent 60 minutes proving that one of America's most prominent politicians was fundamentally compromised. Mr. Schiff, Kennedy began, his Louisiana drawl now carrying the unmistakable accent of absolute victory. We've covered a lot of ground here today. We've talked about your leaking of classified information. We've discussed your 3 years of lies about Russian coordination. We've examined your financial corruption and your service to Hollywood donors. We've documented your election interference and your systematic violation of Americans' constitutional rights. Kennedy began walking slowly around the chamber, like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument to a jury of the American people. But all of that evidence, all of those documents, all of those constitutional violations, they all come down to one simple truth, that folks back home in Louisiana understand better than any fancy lawyer or Hollywood producer. He stopped walking and faced Schiff directly. You forgot who you work for. The simple statement hit the chamber like a thunderbolt. In 6 words, Kennedy had captured the essence of everything they had discovered. All the corruption, all the lies, all the constitutional violations stemmed from one fundamental betrayal. Schiff had forgotten that he worked for the American people, not for himself. See, back in Louisiana, we understand something that apparently gets forgotten in Washington, Kennedy continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a country preacher delivering moral instruction. We understand that political power is a privilege, not a right. It's a temporary trust given by the people to be used in service of the people. Kennedy's voice began to build with righteous indignation. But you turned that privilege into personal profit. You turned that trust into a weapon against the very people who gave it to you. You used the power of your office to serve Hollywood donors, foreign interests, and your own bank account. Everyone except the Americans who elected you. He began listing Schiff's betrayals with the precision of an accountant and the passion of a prophet. You leaked their classified secrets to build your media brand. You lied to them about Russian coordination to maintain your political relevance. You took millions from entertainment companies to silence their conservative voices. You suppressed truthful information to help your preferred presidential candidate. Kennedy's voice rose to fill the entire chamber. At every single decision point, you chose personal interest over public service. At every opportunity to serve the American people, you chose to serve yourself instead. The moral weight of Kennedy's words was crushing. This wasn't just about policy disagreements or political tactics. This was about the fundamental failure of someone who had forgotten the basic purpose of public service. Mr. Schiff, the people of California didn't send you to Congress to get rich off Hollywood donors. They didn't elect you to leak classified information for television appearances. They didn't choose you to suppress their constitutional rights or interfere in their elections. Kennedy's voice became cutting. They sent you there to represent their interests, protect their rights, and defend their Constitution. And you failed them in every possible way. Kennedy reached into his jacket and pulled out letters, handwritten correspondence that he placed carefully on the table. These are letters from your constituents, Mr. Schiff, real people from your district who trusted you to serve them honestly. He began reading excerpts, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayed trust. Sarah Martinez from Glendale writes, I voted for Congressman Schiff because I thought he would fight corruption. Instead, he became the corruption. Michael Chen from Burbank. My representative sold out my First Amendment rights to his Hollywood donors. Maria Rodriguez from Pasadena. I'm embarrassed that Adam Schiff represents my community. Kennedy placed the letters down gently, treating them with the respect due to the voices of citizens betrayed by their own representative. These are the people you forgot about, Mr. Schiff. These are the Americans whose trust you violated for 30 pieces of silver. Kennedy's final words were delivered with the moral authority of someone who had spent his career understanding what public service really means. You see, there's a difference between us that goes beyond party politics or regional culture. I remember why I came to Washington. I came here to serve the people of Louisiana and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's it. Those are my 2 jobs. His voice became gentle but devastating. But you came here to build a brand. You came here to get rich. You came here to become famous. And when those personal ambitions conflicted with your duty to the American people, you chose personal ambition every single time. Kennedy moved to stand directly in front of Schiff, close enough that his words carried the intimate force of personal judgment. The tragedy isn't that you're compromised, Mr. Schiff. The tragedy is that you had the privilege of serving 700,000 Americans in Congress, and you wasted that privilege on personal enrichment and political theater. Kennedy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried to every corner of the chamber. Back home in Louisiana, we have a saying, you can put a Harvard degree on a corrupt politician, but he's still just a corrupt politician. The comparison was devastating in its simplicity. All of Schiff's education, experience, and sophistication meant nothing when measured against his fundamental failure of character. Mr. Schiff, sometimes simple country truth beats fancy city lies. Sometimes constitutional principles matter more than political ambition. And today, the American people got to see what happens when someone who actually remembers his oath meets someone who forgot why he took it. At that moment, something unprecedented happened. The chamber erupted in applause, not just from Republicans, but from gallery observers, staff members, and even some Democratic colleagues who could no longer defend the indefensible. The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes, a spontaneous expression of relief that someone had finally held power accountable to principle. Schiff sat motionless throughout the ovation, staring at the table in front of him, unable to meet Kennedy's eyes or face the cameras that were broadcasting his complete humiliation to millions of Americans. His political career had just ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet devastation of documented truth delivered by a man who understood the Constitution better than Schiff understood his own actions. When the applause finally died down, Kennedy delivered his final judgment with the calm authority of constitutional justice served. The Constitution works, Mr. Schiff. It just took a simple country lawyer to remind everyone how. The 30 seconds of silence that followed Kennedy's final words will be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in American political history. In that silence, everyone in the chamber and millions watching across the country understood that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. The complete constitutional dismantling of a career politician by someone who actually understood what public service means. Schiff sat motionless, staring at his hands, unable to formulate any response to the systematic documentation of his violations. His expensive attorneys whispered frantically among themselves, but they all understood that no legal strategy could overcome the devastating evidence Kennedy had presented. This wasn't a matter of legal technicalities or procedural defenses. This was about documented facts and constitutional principles. Democratic staffers in the chamber began frantically checking their phones, trying to gauge the reaction on social media and cable news. What they found was staggering. Even liberal commentators were struggling to defend Schiff against Kennedy's evidence-based assault. CNN's initial coverage focused on the explosive allegations rather than dismissing them. MSNBC anchors looked visibly shaken as they tried to process the scope of Kennedy's documentation. Within minutes of Kennedy's closing statement, social media exploded with unprecedented force. Schiff dismantled shot to #1 trending worldwide, accumulating over 2 million mentions in the first hour. Country justice and constitutional accountability followed close behind, as Americans across the political spectrum shared clips of Kennedy's most devastating moments. The most viral clip wasn't Kennedy's evidence presentation or constitutional lecture. It was the 30 seconds of Schiff sitting in stunned silence after Kennedy's final words. The image of a powerful politician completely unable to defend his actions became an instant meme, shared millions of times with captions like, "When the country lawyer actually knows the Constitution," and "The moment a career ended." Conservative Twitter erupted in celebration, but surprisingly, many moderate and even liberal users began sharing the clips as well. Kennedy's focus on constitutional principles rather than partisan attacks had created something rare in modern politics, a moment that transcended party lines because it spoke to fundamental questions about honesty and accountability in government. Cable news networks found themselves in an unprecedented situation. The evidence Kennedy had presented was too well documented and specific to dismiss as partisan theater. Fox News led every segment with the hearing for the next week. CNN was forced to acknowledge the serious questions raised about Schiff's conduct. Late-night comedy shows, which had regularly featured Schiff as a heroic figure fighting Trump, suddenly found themselves with unusable material. Stephen Colbert's writers reportedly scrapped an entire week's worth of scripts. Saturday Night Live quietly removed a planned Schiff appearance from their upcoming show. The political implications were immediate and devastating. Within 48 hours, House Democratic leadership announced that Schiff would be stepping back from his Intelligence Committee assignments pending review of recent allegations. Nancy Pelosi, who had championed Schiff throughout the Russia investigation, issued a carefully worded statement that avoided defending his specific actions. Republican leaders, meanwhile, recognized they were looking at a political superstar. Kennedy's combination of constitutional expertise, communication skills, and ability to document liberal overreach with devastating precision made him an immediate presidential contender. Within a week, major conservative donors were reaching out to his office. Speaking invitations poured in from across the country, but perhaps most importantly, Kennedy's systematic destruction of Schiff had reminded Americans of something they had almost forgotten: that politicians could be held accountable, that constitutional principles still mattered, and that sometimes truth really could triumph over political spin. Polling conducted in the week following the hearing showed Kennedy with approval ratings that defied conventional political wisdom. His favorability among Republicans was 94%, but even more surprisingly, his favorability among independents reached 73%, and 31% of Democrats approved of his performance numbers that political scientists called impossible in the current political climate. The secret to Kennedy's success wasn't partisan rhetoric or personal attacks. It was his methodical presentation of documented evidence and his obvious respect for constitutional principles. Americans across party lines responded to someone who seemed to actually understand and care about the founding documents, regardless of their political preferences. For Schiff, the aftermath was professionally catastrophic. Fundraising dried up as even Hollywood donors distanced themselves from the documented actions. Speaking engagements were canceled. Book deals were quietly withdrawn. The man who had built his career on cable news appearances found himself unwelcome on the very networks that had made him famous. More importantly, federal prosecutors began reviewing Kennedy's evidence for potential criminal referrals. When a sitting congressman presents documented evidence of perjury, classified information leaks, and election interference to a congressional committee, the Justice Department is obligated to investigate. The simple country lawyer from Louisiana had just reminded Washington and America that the Constitution still works when someone has the knowledge and courage to defend it. Sometimes it just takes the right person asking the right questions with the right evidence to prove that in America, no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. Smash that like button if you believe constitutional justice was served. Subscribe for more epic political accountability. And comment, Constitution wins. With the evidence laid bare and a 20-year legacy shattered in under an hour, one has to wonder, was Adam Schiff the only politician leveraging power for personal gain, or is this just the first thread in a much larger, darker web of Washington corruption?